Function calling is one of the most powerful things you can do with an AI voice agent, but also one of the most confusing to set up. Inside my community of more than 1,400 plus people building AI voice agents like these, I'd say about 80 to 90% of the questions I get have to do with function calling inside of these voice agents. If you're new here, my name is Tommy Christ. I've automated well over 100,000 calls using AI voice agents in real businesses. In today's video, I'm going to break it all down in plain English so you can finally start understanding how function calling really works inside of your AI voice agents. We'll walk through what webhooks are, how parameters and headers work, as well as how to format your JSON. And at the end, I'll actually prompt and create a function step-by-step inside of Retell so that you can follow along and start understanding what all these words actually mean. So let's hop into it. And so before we actually hop in and make one of these inside of a platform like Retell AI, it's really important that we actually go over what even is function calling and the core components of a function. So before I get into that, who am I? Once again, my name's Tommy Christ. I've started my agency a year and a half ago. I've automated over 100,000 calls with AI, and in my community, I help 1,400 plus other people do the same. So I feel pretty qualified to talk about this. I've basically been making these functions for over 18 months now, and as well as helping other people do that. And if you'd like to work with me and my agency or Rose AI, make sure to book a call in the top link down below. So let's hop into the presentation. So giving your agent power, I like to think of it like Batman's tool belt, because your agent can already talk and it has access to all this information. But when it actually needs to do something like book a call, create perhaps a new lead in your CRM, cancel a booking, send information like an email or somewhere, or transfer a call, it uses a function call. And this is sort of your Batman's tool belt of things your agent can now do. You can give it the power to do to really take it from like, oh, this is cool, to something you can really use in your business. And so there's three types of functions, at least relating to AI voice agents. There are functions that happen pre-call, during the call, and then post-call. And so all of these types of calls actually have very different use cases in which they're useful and better than other types of functions for different business use cases. And so I'm going to explain that here. Pre-call functions, and so the core component of this is what it has access to and then what it's actually for. So pre-call functions are basically ran. Say someone calls your agent's phone number, your company's phone number where an AI voice agent is connected. That's when this function is ran and some information is gathered. So all it has access to is the caller's phone number. It obviously doesn't know anything it's gonna say on the call because that hasn't actually been said yet. And so the information it has is the caller's phone number. And stuff this is used for is call memory. Say you have a bank of all the past calls, it can go and grab and see like, okay, this person's called before 3 times. Last time we talked about their billing, I can, mention their name. I already know their name. It's something like Linda. You can be like, hey, Linda, we talked about your billing last time. Is that what you're calling about now? And then the second thing it can actually be used for is identifying or verifying callers where, you only want 5 or 6 different people, calling into this line, and can just block calls from certain numbers, or blocking calls from certain numbers and everybody else is fine, or blocking every call except for like 3 or 4 different numbers. Next are in-call functions, which is mainly what people have questions about and where there's the most nuance and probably the most complicated. And this has access to anything discussed or gathered on the call up until that point on the call. And so this is used for stuff like booking meetings, identifying or verifying callers, once again, if they give some sort of code, getting order information, transferring calls, which is a big one, and then lastly, sending links or other information. And you can think of this as you call in, you're like, hey, I want a quote for my construction project. And then the person is like, great, let me collect your address, name, and a date and time that works for you. And so that would be the actual information it has access to and can then send out. Then lastly are post-call functions. And what it has access to in this is the most it has of any function, which is the entire conversation, all the data related to it. So that's stuff like the call number, such as the pre-call, as well as any information about the latency of the call, any analysis you actually do on the call. And so it just has the most information in post-call. However, in-call you need sometimes because, you need to see if the appointment slots are open. And so that's why in-call is still very useful, is you're able to have that back and forth with the person on the phone. Whereas post-call, you can't like book in a time, see it's busy, and then like call back the person. And so what is it useful for then? Well, it's good for uploading data to a CRM. So if you notice a call went well, you can upload that lead to a CRM. It's good for actually logging calls and making sure you have a list of all these calls and sort of analyzing them, generating reports based on the calls, where you can generate a little report for each call and be like, this call is an 8 out of 10, this call was a 5 out of 10, like what went well, what didn't. And then lastly here is sending info. I've used the post call function a lot for e-commerce companies to send stuff like, support links or return links, things like that after the call. So how do functions actually work? The order of operations for this is that first, your voice agent triggers a webhook, then it passes all the information it gathered from the call. And so pre-call, like I mentioned, this is just the caller's phone number. During the call, it's any information you decide to grab from that call. And then after the call, it's all the information. And then next, the backend does the action. So this is where you use, a no-code platform such as make.com, N8N, or actual Python. My dog decided to join us. Leia, say hi to everybody. And then lastly, the response or the information from this backend function is then used in the rest of the conversation. Or, the action is just taken if it's post-call or pre-call. Actually, pre-call you can use in the conversation as well. And so here are the key components of a function. First, webhooks. And so I like to think of a webhook like a digital mailbox. I've used this analogy for a while because your voice agents, think of it like your voice agent mailing instructions or data to a specific address, the webhook URL, and that webhook is that address. And inside of that is sort of like this mail card sent so that it knows where to send it and what type of data to send. Inside the message is parameters, which I'm about to explain in a second, used for what it wants done. So that's stuff like the date and time for a booking would be considered parameters. And then your backend opens the message, does whatever job it needs to do, and then sends a reply, such as opens the message with the date and time, checks if that date and time is available, and then sends back like either it is available, like that works, or it sends back alternative times, such as, we can't do 9:30, but 10 and 10:30 are open. Next are parameters, and these are the little details, like I mentioned, your agent adds to the message. So it's like saying, hey, book a demo for John on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Those bits, the name, time, and day, are parameters. And they get added into the webhook letter, so your system knows exactly what to do, and it has all the information it needs. And headers, which you may or may not run into initially, but I'm sure if you do this long enough, you'll run into headers. And so this is before your webhook or mail is accepted. It may need to actually prove who it is. So headers are like the ID badges or secret codes taped to the front of the message. They tell the system like, hey, here's my password. And that's something like an API key, or here's the format I'm using. So something like JSON, and that would be your content type. Just so, the mailbox knows, okay, this is the form the data's in, and we make sure you're actually able to send this data. So lastly is JSON. So JSON is a structure your messages must follow, sort of like filling out a form. It's basically its own language, like coding language. Like it's called JavaScript object notation is what JSON stands for. And it's just a way to organize data so that your system understands it. Like anytime you're sending data in the internet, it's going to be using JSON. So sort of important to learn. I never actually took a course or anything on it. If you just look at it long enough, you start to notice how it works. And so this is just like, instead of writing, hey, John wants a demo at Tuesday at 2 p.m., like your digital mailbox, your webhook wouldn't recognize that, but it would recognize this in JSON when you send the name, John, the day, Tuesday, and the time, 2 p.m. And these are basically key value pairs where name is the key and John is the value. And so here we are in Retell. I'm going to set up a quick test function to show you how all that information actually relates to real functions. And hopefully you'll understand a lot more about the process now and why it actually works the way it does. So in terms of prompting in voice agents and as well as chatbots, you definitely want to tell the AI specifically when you want to run the function and call out the function by name. But basically I say here, ask the caller if they would like to run the function. If they say yes, then I'm going to put the name of the function in here. My thing, I'm just going to call it test_function. And so to create a function inside of Retell, you just come over here to functions, as you might expect, click add, and come down here to custom function. You'll probably be using this the most. The only ones I really don't recommend using in here are the cow.com ones. They're super easy to set up, but if you actually want like a real production ready agent, I recommend creating a custom function to connect cal.com instead. And so in here, you'll see a bunch of stuff. And so you can actually call functions without using an automation platform like Make.com. That wasn't always the case, but they used to not have this API endpoint, headers, query parameters, or anything like that. I still like using a platform like Make.com. I think it gives me a lot more visibility into what's actually happening behind the scenes, and it's just easier to set up and easier to add extra ability to these functions if you ever need to. But do know that you can call any API from here. So basically, the name of the function, this is for you and you only. This is just helps you organize what your functions are and what they do. The description is actually for the AI to know when to run the function. So this one would be once a user says yes and wants to run a function. And so the description actually describes when to use a function. So you sort of mention it in the main prompt here, then the description gives the AI extra context. So if it was something like checking available slots on a calendar, it'd be once a person initially gives you your date and time, use this function to check the available slots, would be an example of a description. This API endpoint is where you actually want to put your webhook. And so here in make.com, I have this demo webhook just because it's really easy to visualize the data. So I'll copy this webhook here and paste it there. And then you can see the headers here, like I mentioned. Now we won't need this for this webhook. I don't have any API key restrictions or anything like that on this. And then the parameters here is where you actually put your JSON. Now Retell makes it super easy. You can change it to form and do this no code version where you have these key value pairs where it's the name, type, and then a description so the AI actually knows how to get it. And then you can also write the JSON equivalent there. And so since this is a beginner tutorial, I'm actually just going to show you because I believe that's what will be easiest for most of you. So this first one is just going to be name, the name of the caller as the description. And once again, this is the same as the function where the name is for you to help identify it. And then the description is for the AI to actually find and pick out, okay, this is where they mention their name. And then the type would be string. You don't have to worry about any of these. Just use a string if it's text, and then use a number if it's specifically only a number. So like a date and time wouldn't work because there's like colons and stuff like that in there. That would still be considered a string. So numbers pretty specific. So you're mostly going to be using strings. And then required basically means it can't run this function unless this parameter is included. So it has to always be included. And so I'll just make this required. And then some additional stuff you have. If you want to save anything from the response of the webhook, and I'll show you how to do that in a second, you can put that here as another key value pair. And then if you want the AI to speak during the execution of the function, then you would click this and you'd say like, hey, I'm checking the available slots now. But I only really recommend that if you have some sort of lengthy function. So usually I just say speak after execution. And so now we actually have this function set up. So let's test it right here. And we can see that information be sent to the webhook. So here, if I go to manual chat, I'll just say, good, my name is Tommy, run the function. You can see when you test it in here, you can actually see it ran the function. It sent this JSON where the name, the key of name, and the value of Tommy was sent. And the result was that it was accepted. And that result will be important in a second. Then if I come here, you can see I have some records waiting to be processed in make.com. You can see this webhook was just sent name Tommy. And then in between here, you could add pretty much anything you want. Again, that's where it gets into more automation stuff, which is beyond the scope of this video. But in terms of getting this data back into Retell AI, you need a webhook response. So in this webhook response, you return a status, which basically tells the platform like, hey, like it worked. 200 is the sort of basic status response for something that succeeded. Then the body is where you send the information or the actual response. The user's name is, and then I'll use this argument, Tommy. You can see I lied a bit. There's actually a lot more information here other than just the arguments in terms of what is sent inside of this webhook, but the only stuff you're really ever going to be using for the most part is the arguments. And so if I turn this on to run immediately, and then I have this same conversation, say, hi, my name is Tommy. Yes. And you'll see it ran the function once again. We can see back here, it just ran this and it was a success. And if we look at the tool result, you can see the response was the user's name is Tommy. And so now you know how to send and receive data in your AI voice agents. If you'd like one of these built for your own company, make sure to click the top link down below and book a call with us, me and my team at Rose AI. Again, we've automated well over 100,000 calls, so we know what we're doing. And if you'd like to continue learning about AI voice agents and how to build them, you can also join my free community that's linked down below. I have a bunch of free resources and, a bunch more videos in there to help you out. So I hope you have a great day. I'll see you in the next video.